In a town where dust clung to every soul and mercy had long dried up under the western sun, she stood barefoot in the street, just a girl in rags, her face streaked with tears and dirt. No one stopped. No one asked her name. Wagons rolled by, boots kicked up sand, and the saloon door swung open for everyone but her. She was invisible in a place that only saw worth in gold, guns, or man's grit. Her cries, soft at first, turned into whispers swallowed by the wind. Most looked away. Some muttered curses. But none dared to care, except one man. He wasn't a preacher. He wasn't a sheriff. He wasn't even whole in the eyes of the world. He was a blind farmer, with eyes as pale as the morning fog and hands rough from a lifetime of tilling stubborn land. Most thought him useless, a relic too kind for the cutthroat West. But that day, when the crowd ignored the girl, it was he who stepped forward. Without sight, he saw what others missed: fear wrapped in silence, hunger hidden behind small shoulders, and the kind of pain that doesn't speak but screams. And in that single moment, the course of both their lives changed forever. This story doesn't begin with a gunfight or a robbery. It begins with a door left open, a bowl of warm stew, a blanket that smelled of home. The blind man had nothing to gain. He couldn't even see the girl's face. But sometimes, the ones who have lost the most are the only ones who truly know what giving means. He didn't ask for her past. He simply made room for her in his world, even as the town whispered behind their backs. Because in the Old West, where trust was scarce and kindness even scarcer, shelter wasn't just a roof, it was redemption. What happened next turned strangers into family, and a forgotten child into someone the town would never overlook again. But it wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy. The farmer faced storms greater than drought or debt. He faced the cruelty of neighbors, the shadows of the girl's past, and the weight of his own loneliness. And yet, through it all, he stood firm. Because sometimes, being blind allows you to see with the kind of clarity this world desperately needs. Stay with me. This isn't just a tale from the dusty pages of the Old West. It's a story about what happens when one person chooses compassion over convenience. When a man without sight becomes a light in the darkest hour. What began as an ignored cry on a forgotten street would soon become a story that even time couldn't bury. The blind farmer's name was Silas Boone, a man whose quiet life had stretched across the prairie like the long shadow of an old oak tree. His cabin sat on the edge of Dry Creek, where the grass was brittle and the wind never rested. Most folks passed by his homestead with little more than a glance. Silas didn't talk much, didn't come into town unless absolutely necessary, and never asked for help, even after he lost his sight in a sawmill accident over a decade ago. Yet his land was always tended, his animals fed, and his door, unlike so many others in the West, remained unlocked. When Silas heard the soft shuffle of torn shoes on the dirt road and the muffled sobs of someone too small to be wandering alone, he paused mid-task. He couldn't see the girl, but he felt her presence like a shift in the air. Without hesitation, he called out gently, "You lost, child?" At first, she didn't answer. Silence stood between them like a wall. But after a long pause, her whisper broke through. "They told me to leave." It was all he needed to hear. Silas extended a calloused hand in her direction, and after a moment of hesitation, she placed her tiny fingers in his. He led her inside, offering a chair near the fire and a bowl of rabbit stew. She didn't touch it at first, eyes darting around the cabin like a cornered animal. Her face was hollow, her skin bruised with more than just dust. She told him her name was Ellie, and that she hadn't eaten in 2 days. She spoke little, her voice like dry grass brushing against wood. Silas didn't press. He simply handed her a warm cloth for her hands and a wool blanket for her back. In that simple room, with nothing but a blind man and a frightened girl, something sacred took root. That night, Ellie curled into the corner of the cot Silas had offered her. He slept on the floor, near the stove, breathing slow and steady. The wind howled outside, kicking sand against the windows, but inside, there was warmth, not just from the fire, but from something deeper. Ellie watched Silas as he slept, uncertain what to think of this man who couldn't see her tears, yet still wiped them away. In the stillness, she realized something rare. For the first time in a long time, no one wanted anything from her. She was safe. The next morning, Silas made cornbread and beans, humming an old hymn his mother used to sing. Ellie remained quiet, but something in her posture had softened. She ate beside him in silence, chewing slowly, as if afraid the meal might vanish. Silas asked no questions. Instead, he handed her a small wooden whistle carved from pine. "You ever need me," he said, "just blow it once." Ellie nodded, clutching the gift like it was gold. In a world that had only taken from her, the blind man had given her something priceless: dignity without demand. As the days passed, Ellie stayed by Silas's side, unsure whether she was guest, stray, or something in between. The townsfolk began to notice her absence from the alley behind the butcher's shop, where she used to sleep curled beside broken crates. Some said good riddance. Others whispered that she'd been taken by coyotes. But none dared ask Silas. He was left alone, both by respect and the mystery of his blindness. He rarely spoke of the girl, yet each evening a second bowl sat on the table, and a second quilt warmed the cot. Silas taught Ellie how to milk the goats, how to feel the soil and tell if it would take seed. He spoke of the seasons like they were old friends, and taught her to read the sky like scripture. Ellie, in return, swept the floor, patched his torn shirts, and told stories at night, half-remembered fables from a time before her world had gone quiet. Slowly, her laughter began to return, uncertain at first, like a foal's first steps. But it was real, and Silas listened with a smile, even when he couldn't see it. He always knew when she was smiling. He said the room felt warmer when she did. One morning, Ellie found an old harmonica in a rusted tin box. She brought it to Silas, who held it delicately in his hands. "Haven't touched this in 20 years, he muttered. With a slow breath, he pressed it to his lips. The sound that came out was raw, cracked, but alive. Ellie clapped softly, then asked him to teach her. And so, under the low roof of that cabin, with hens clucking outside and wind whispering through the boards, a blind man and a broken girl found harmony, not just in music, but in each other. But shadows don't stay gone in the West. One night, as Silas dozed in his rocking chair, Ellie froze at the sound of boots crunching gravel. She peeked through a crack in the shutter and saw a figure approaching. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat and a smirk too cruel to be forgotten. Ellie's breath caught. It was Cole McCready, a drifter from her past, the reason she ran in the first place. She backed away from the window, heart thudding. Silas stirred, sensing her fear before she spoke a word. The knock on the door was slow, deliberate. Ellie's hand reached for the whistle Silas had given her. He rose, steady despite the years and blindness. "Behind me," he whispered, as the wind howled through the cracks in the wood, and danger stood just outside. Ellie realized that sometimes the strongest protector doesn't need to see the threat to face it. He just needs to know someone behind him is worth standing for. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Silas standing firm, his posture calm but unyielding. Cole McCready tilted his head, clearly amused by the sight of an old blind man defending a cabin. "Didn't know you kept pets, Boone," he said with a sneer. Ellie, trembling behind Silas, could barely breathe. She hadn't heard that voice in months, but its weight fell on her like 1,000 pounds of memory. Shackles, screams, nights spent hiding under broken carts. She clutched the whistle tighter, but Silas simply asked, "What do you want?" Cole stepped forward, dust clinging to his boots like bad intentions. She ran off with something that wasn't hers. "I aim to collect." His voice was all poison and lies. Silas didn't move, didn't even flinch. "She's under my roof now," he replied. "Whatever she was before, she's someone else here." His words didn't rise like threats, they dropped like verdicts. Cole's smirk faded for a moment, replaced by something colder, the kind of look men gave before drawing their pistols. But Silas stood his ground, blind eyes unwavering. "You'd best leave, son. Not just for her sake, for yours." There was a long silence, the kind that makes time stretch until it cracks. Cole spat in the dirt and turned, but not before muttering, "Ain't over," as his boots disappeared into the night. Ellie let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Silas shut the door, slid the bolt, and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Evil always comes back," he said, voice soft. "But we don't run from it here. We stand." That night, neither of them slept. The fire crackled low, and Ellie sat at his feet, head on her knees, listening to the slow rhythm of his breath, like the ticking of a clock that refused to stop. The next day, Ellie asked him why he didn't send her away. Why he didn't just give her up to avoid trouble. Silas chuckled, the sound like gravel tumbling down a hill. Because someone once did that for me, he said. And then, for the first time, he told her his story. How he lost his sight, not just from an accident, but from a fire set by men who wanted his land. How he'd been left for dead, only to be saved by a stranger who never gave his name. I've waited years to pay that back, Silas said. Then you knocked on my life. From that day on, Ellie stopped seeing herself as a burden. She carried water to the chickens, learned how to fix the fence, and even dared to play the harmonica by herself. Silas listened with pride, nodding in time with the tune. Every note she played was no longer just sound. It was proof. Proof that the girl once ignored in the street was learning to be seen. Trouble didn't take long to return. 2 weeks after Cole's visit, the general store in town was robbed. Witnesses said they saw a young girl running near the edge of town, barefoot, ragged. The description matched Ellie too well. Sheriff Parsons, a man who never trusted children without last names, rode out with 2 deputies to ask questions. When he arrived at Silas's cabin, the air grew tense. We just need to talk to the girl, he said, hand resting a little too easily on his holster. Silas stood in the doorway again, Ellie peeking from behind the curtain. She hasn't left this land in days, Silas said. You're welcome to search, but you'll do it with respect. The sheriff hesitated. Blind or not, Silas Boone's name still held weight. Parsons removed his hat and nodded. We'll be quick. The search revealed nothing. No stolen goods, no signs of sneaking off in the night. Still, whispers started in town. The girl's past was too muddy, too uncertain. And in places like Dry Creek, gossip could do more damage than bullets. Ellie began to feel it again, that ache of not belonging. She avoided the porch, stopped playing harmonica, and withdrew into herself. Silas noticed, of course. One evening, he sat beside her, both of them silent for a long time. You know what makes the West so hard? He asked. A man can ride for miles and still not find a place that lets him stop. She looked at him, eyes wide and glassy. So how do you know when you found it? He smiled. When your shadow feels lighter. The next morning, Silas took her into town himself. Word had gotten around that he was bringing her to the church to speak with the pastor. The crowd gathered fast. Some thought it was a confession. Others expected Silas to send her away. But when they arrived, Silas stood before everyone and said, This girl has worked my land, fed my livestock, tended my wounds, and brought laughter into a home that had forgotten how. If that's a crime, I reckon you'll have to arrest me too. The silence that followed was thicker than dust. The pastor stepped forward and laid a hand on Ellie's head. This town don't need more judges, he said. It needs witnesses. Witnesses to what grace looks like. That moment shifted something in Dry Creek. Ellie wasn't just the girl in rags anymore. She was the girl the blind man saw. And if he saw something in her, maybe the rest of them ought to try looking too. Life on the farm settled into a new rhythm, quiet and steady like the hum of summer cicadas. Ellie began planting seeds alongside Silas, learning when to press them deep and when to let them breathe near the surface. She started leaving her hair unwrapped, no longer ashamed of the strands matted by years of neglect. With each passing day, she grew into the space Silas had given her, not as a visitor, but as someone who belonged. And in return, the land seemed to soften too. Wildflowers crept along the fence posts, the hens laid more eggs, and the evenings were filled with music and warmth instead of dread. But even in a healing town, not all hearts turn with the wind. Cole McCready hadn't forgotten her, and though he'd slithered into silence after the sheriff's visit, Ellie still felt his presence like a shadow riding behind every cloud. She took to carrying the whistle around her neck again. At night, she'd lie awake listening for distant hooves, her ears tuned to the sound of danger, her breath shallow with memory. Silas never asked, but he knew. He'd lived long enough to recognize the look of someone bracing for a storm, even under clear skies. One afternoon, Silas surprised Ellie with a gift. A small saddle he'd carved from scrap wood, painted in the same shade as the Appaloosa he once rode before blindness claimed his sight. You're not just passing through, he told her. You're part of this place now, and one day, you'll ride farther than I ever could. Ellie traced the curves of the wood, her fingers trembling. It wasn't just a toy. It was a promise. That she had a future. That someone believed in it. That someone believed in her. Inspired by that moment, Ellie asked to help deliver goods to the widow on the ridge. It would be her first solo trip. Silas hesitated, but nodded. He packed the cart, gave her a map marked with stones and trees, and placed the wooden saddle beside her seat. "If you get lost, stop and listen," he said. "The land talks. You just have to be still enough to hear it." She hugged him tight, a hug that said more than any words could. Then she rode off, dust trailing behind her like a ribbon in the wind. But halfway to the ridge, as Ellie rounded a bend near the old creek bed, a figure stepped into the road. Cole. This time, he wasn't smiling. He held a lasso in one hand and a bottle in the other. "Told you we weren't finished," he growled. The mule skidded to a halt, ears pinned back. Ellie froze, heart racing. She reached for the whistle, but it was gone. It had fallen, unnoticed, somewhere along the trail. Alone now, with only a broken past and a trembling cart between her and the man who once owned her fate, Ellie stood at the edge of everything she had built. And it was about to be tested. Ellie's hands gripped the reins, knuckles white, mind scrambling for escape. Cole stepped closer, boots crushing twigs in the years she'd spent trying to forget him. "Thought you could run forever," he hissed, eyes bloodshot. "You owe me." But Ellie, though afraid, didn't shrink. She remembered Silas's words, about stillness, about strength. She closed her eyes for just a breath, and when she opened them, she met Cole's gaze with something new, resolve. "I don't owe you anything," she said, voice shaking but steady. "You left me to die in the cold. I owe myself the chance to live." Her words struck him like a slap. He lunged forward, but in that moment, the wind changed. The mule reared, startled by the tension, knocking the cart sideways. Cole lost balance and fell hard, cursing as he scrambled to his feet. Ellie didn't wait. She turned the mule sharply, nearly toppling it, and fled back down the trail as fast as the rickety wheels would allow. Back at the farm, Silas heard the frantic gallop long before Ellie reached the gate. He stepped onto the porch, hands steady. Ellie tumbled from the seat, breathless, eyes wide with fear and fury. "He found me," she gasped. "Cole." Silas didn't speak. He simply reached for his coat and shotgun, the one he hadn't touched in years. "Then we're done running," he said. "Let him come." But Ellie grabbed his sleeve. "No," she said. "Let me face him. I need to end this." He paused, the air thick between them, then slowly nodded. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Ellie stood by the gate with a wooden saddle slung across her shoulder and a fire in her heart. When Cole returned, as she knew he would, he found not a frightened girl, but someone forged by silence, shaped by kindness, and anchored by truth. "This is my land now," she said. "You've got no place here." He laughed, bitter and broken. But something in her stance unnerved him. She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. And when the townsfolk began to appear, drawn by the sound of shouting, standing shoulder to shoulder behind her, Cole saw what he was truly facing. Not just a girl, a community, a story no longer his to control. Without a word, he turned and walked away, swallowed by the dusk. Ellie exhaled, chest heaving. Silas stepped beside her, smiling faintly. "You did more than stand," he said. "You rose." And in that quiet moment, with the night finally still, Ellie realized the past had no hold over her anymore. She had found her place in the world, and this time, she had earned every inch of it. The days that followed felt different, lighter, as if the air itself had been cleared of something heavy. The whispers in town faded, not because people forgot, but because they now spoke of Ellie with a new kind of reverence. She wasn't the girl in rags anymore. She was the girl who stood her ground. Children began to wave when she passed by. Shopkeepers greeted her by name. The same townsfolk who once turned their backs now tipped their hats with quiet respect. And through it all, Ellie stayed humble, never forgetting the blind man who had first seen her when no one else would. Silas noticed a shift too, though he never spoke much of it. He listened to the changes in Ellie's footsteps, the way they no longer hesitated near doors or skittered away from shadows. He heard her laughter return, louder now, unguarded. She started spending time at the schoolhouse, helping the younger ones with reading and drawing. The children clung to her, eager for the stories she told, stories of courage, of the land, and of a blind farmer who taught her how to see. In time, they began to call her Miss Ellie, not out of politeness, but admiration. One afternoon, as they sat beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek, Ellie asked Silas if he regretted anything. He leaned back in his chair, face turned to the sun. "Maybe I regret not trusting people sooner," he said. "But then again, if I hadn't lived that way, I might not have been ready for you." His words sank deep into her heart. She had spent so long running from what she was, she hadn't realized she had become someone else entirely. Someone strong, someone seen. That same evening, Ellie found the whistle Silas had carved for her, buried beneath a pile of old blankets. She cleaned it, tied a new cord, and placed it around his neck. "Now you can call for me," she said with a grin. Silas chuckled. "Might just do that if the hens ever revolt." But beneath the jest, there was something tender, a quiet acknowledgement that their bond had reversed and deepened. Where once he'd been her shelter, now she was his too. The seasons began to turn, and with them, the land. Crops rose from the soil like promises kept. Neighbors stopped by more often, bringing seeds, stories, and songs. Silas's farm was no longer an island. It had become a beacon. And Ellie, once the invisible girl in the dirt, now stood at its heart. The past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined her. It was just another trail she had ridden and left behind. One autumn morning, Ellie stood on the porch watching the golden fields sway in the breeze. Her hands were dusted with flour, and her apron held the scent of cornbread and herbs. It was a scene of peace, earned, not given. Silas sat in his rocker beside her, humming a tune she now knew by heart. "You ever wonder what folks say about us now?" she asked, teasing. Silas chuckled. "I reckon they say the blind old man raised a girl who sees better than most." But that day brought a letter, sealed in wax, delivered by a young rider with wind-burnt cheeks. Ellie opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as she read. It was from the pastor's council in a neighboring town. They had heard her story. They wanted her to come speak, to share what it meant to survive, to forgive, and to start over. Ellie read the letter aloud to Silas, and when she finished, he didn't speak for a long while. Then he said, "Looks like your trail's still stretching, girl. Better ride it while it's clear." Ellie hesitated. "What if I leave and never come back?" Silas turned his head toward her. "Then I'll still be proud. But I don't think you're leaving for good. I think you're carrying this place with you, just like I carried the memory of the man who saved me." She nodded, eyes wet but steady. That night, she packed her things, a small bag, a clean dress, and the wooden saddle. Not because she needed them, but because they reminded her of who she had been and who she had become. Before sunrise, the townsfolk gathered to see her off. They brought pies, prayers, and promises to care for Silas in her absence. Ellie mounted a borrowed horse, glancing back at the porch where Silas sat, his hand raised in farewell. "Remember," he called, "you ain't just telling your story, you're telling ours." With a final wave, Ellie turned toward the horizon, her heart full and her spirit unshaken. She no longer feared the unknown. She was the story now, the kind that reminded people that even in the hardest corners of the West, light could take root. And as she rode out, the dust behind her caught the morning sun, painting the trail gold. Somewhere in that quiet ride, she felt the past fall away like old skin. Ahead of her stretched not just a road, but a calling. And every hoofbeat said the same thing. You were seen, you were saved, and now it's your turn to save someone else. Ellie's journey through the neighboring towns was met with silence at first. Curious stares, hesitant glances, and the guarded caution of people who'd seen too many drifters pass through with stories too worn to believe. But when she stepped into the chapel and stood before the council, she didn't speak of her pain to earn pity. She spoke of Silas, of the night he opened his door without seeing her face, of the way his kindness didn't ask who she had been, only who she was willing to become. And as her voice carried through the room, something unshakable settled over the crowd. What began as a visit turned into something deeper. Families invited her to supper. School teachers asked her to speak to their students. Old ranchers, hardened by dust and war, removed their hats when she walked by, not because of what she wore, but because of what she carried. Her presence became a kind of mirror. When people looked at her, they saw not just a girl redeemed, but a possibility, That mercy could still bloom in barren places, and that grace, once planted, could spread like wildfire. Letters began arriving at the mission, asking for Ellie by name. Stories of girls mistreated, boys abandoned, families fractured by silence. Ellie didn't have answers for all of them, but she had something else. She had presence. She started visiting homesteads, bringing bread, sitting beside mothers too weary to speak. She didn't try to fix everything. She listened, and sometimes that was enough. Her voice, once lost in alleys and dust, now carried weight in places where law and prayer had long since failed. Back in Dry Creek, Silas received word of her work through the hands of travelers. One man brought a carved wooden figure of a girl on horseback. Another brought a loaf of sweetbread with a note tied in red string. "She brings peace, like you did." Silas placed the gifts on his shelf, his blind eyes turning toward the door each evening at sunset, waiting, but never worrying. He knew she'd return when the time was right. In the meantime, he tended the land, taught a few neighbor boys how to read trail signs, and kept the harmonica by his side. Then, one morning, with the wind shifting and the crows flying low, Silas heard the sound he'd never mistaken, the rhythm of familiar hoofbeats on hard soil. He stepped onto the porch, cane in hand, and smiled before she even spoke. Ellie dismounted, taller now in posture, not just in age. She walked up the steps slowly, tears burning behind her eyes, and whispered, "I'm home." Silas didn't say a word. He simply opened his arms, and the girl he had once given shelter to fell into the embrace of the only man who had ever called her enough. Ellie stayed in Dry Creek from that day forward, but she was no longer the quiet girl behind the blind man's shadow. She took over the small schoolhouse, transforming it into a place of laughter and music. Children sang the hymns Silas had taught her, now carried through fresh voices into the future. She opened a pantry behind the church for wanderers and widows, and she rode out weekly to nearby farms with baskets of food and stories tucked into the folds of her dress. As for Silas, his steps slowed, but his smile never faded. He spent his days near the hearth, whittling shapes from cedar, the scent filling the room like memory. He listened to Ellie's stories of the people she had met, the heart she had helped mend. "You planted a garden," she told him one evening. "You just didn't know it." He nodded slowly, whispering, "I just gave water. You made it bloom." And in that soft exchange, the bond between them deepened, not as savior and saved, but as equals in grace. Over time, people from far-off towns came just to sit on the porch where the blind farmer once stood between a girl and her past. They didn't always come to speak. They came to feel what lingered in the air, the quiet proof that redemption wasn't a myth, that sometimes one person's act of courage, a bowl of stew, a place to sleep, a hand extended without demand, could alter the course of another's life, and by extension, a town's destiny. On Silas's final day, the wind was gentle, and the air smelled of wheat and lavender. Ellie sat beside his bed, reading aloud the letter they had received from the governor's office, an official recognition of the work they had done, the lives they had touched. Silas smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes wrinkling like parchment. "Looks like we did all right," he whispered, and with that, the man who had once lived in shadows left the world the same way he had lived in it, quietly, kindly, with his heart wide open. And so the legend grew, not carved in stone or written in books, but carried in the hearts of those who remembered a blind farmer and the girl he saw when no one else would. Their story became more than history. It became a map, a guide for those wandering, for those broken, for those who needed to know that somewhere, someone still believed in the power of shelter, of sight without eyes, of love without condition. And to this day, if you walk the dusty roads near Dry Creek, you might hear it too, the faint sound of a harmonica and a voice calling out, "You're safe here. Come inside." In a world that often moves too fast to notice those left behind, the story of Ellie and Silas reminds us of something timeless, that even in the harshest corners of life, be it a dusty trail or the quiet ache of being unseen, kindness can still carve out a place where healing begins. Silas, a man without sight, saw what others refused to look at, and Ellie, a girl discarded by a town and forgotten by fate, became a living testament to the power of being chosen, not because of what she had to offer, but simply because she was worth it. Their journey wasn't marked by riches or fame, but by something far greater: redemption through relationship. Every moment they shared, every small gesture of trust, built a story that echoed louder than any gunshot or gold rush. The Old West may have been carved by fire and grit, but it was softened by rare souls like Silas, who understood that saving a life didn't always require a weapon. Sometimes it just required a warm bowl, an open door, and the courage to care. Ellie's transformation from a voiceless shadow to a guiding light is proof that the past does not define who we are. It merely prepares us for who we can become. And Silas's legacy, etched not in monuments, but in memories, teaches us that true strength lies not in what we see with our eyes, but in what we choose to believe with our hearts. Together, they rewrote the rules of the West, not with force, but with faith in each other. So ask yourself, how many lives pass by you, crying in silence, unseen in plain sight? And if a blind man could notice one, what excuse do we have? This isn't just a tale of the Old West. It's a mirror held to our present, a quiet challenge to step beyond judgment, beyond comfort, and become the shelter someone else is praying for. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to let it live beyond the screen. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another tale that matters. Like this video if you believe kindness is still worth defending. And share in the comments, have you ever been someone's shelter, or has someone ever been yours? Your words might just be the start of someone else's redemption.